it's artsylyssy, and today we're going to do things a little differently than normal. Are color pencils my main medium? Yes, but I also have other skills. I recently did a gouache painting for a friend of mine, and it kind of made me fall back in love. And at the same time, I was cleaning out my desk, and I found this old gouache painting of mine. It's a little version of me eating blueberry waffles in my childhood kitchen. It's not that great, but I was just learning. Actually, it is great. I'm not even gonna lie. Like, could be better, but that's what we're doing now, improving our technique. But really, the basis of this and kind of what I'm trying to do today is inner child healing. I am generally a pretty positive person. I try to go about my life as optimistic as possible, but a big part of who I am is just that I've always had really big emotions. And I grew up fine. I'm very grateful that I always had food on the table, I had a roof over my head, and my parents provided me with everything that I needed. But not everything is perfect, and I think I'm still working through that. And even though it feels as though I'm in a really great season of my life, I've worked really hard to get to where I am, to be where I am. I am very happy with my relationship, with where I live, with my job, with my friends, and that's great. But some days, even though I'm doing everything possible to pour into myself, exercising, meditating, praying, going to therapy, it still feels like there's a little cloud hanging over my head that is sometimes hard to ignore. And I think when I was thinking of this week's video, it just was really hanging over my head. And like I said, I found this in my desk and thought maybe I should do another one. So my uncle found this picture a while ago in our home in Mexico, and it's a little picture of me. I'll put that here. And one of the things I've been working on in therapy recently is inner child healing. And the more I dive into things and talk through things, it's become increasingly hard to kind of look at pictures of baby Alyssa because I just get overwhelmed with a sense of emotion and sadness, and I just wish I could go back and give her a big hug. Oh, Doug just my cat just sat on my lap and licked me. Thank you, buddy. But I just wish that I could go back and give her a hug. And I will go into that a little bit more later on in this video. I'm just still kind of figuring out what to say, because being on the internet and posting things so publicly is still strange to me, mostly because, it's easy for me to tell strangers my life story. It's just hard for me specifically to kind of share things that are personal when I know that people who know me in real life could be watching this, and that for some reason is harder for me. But I think it's also, like I said, important to kind of highlight the bad days as much as it is fun to highlight the good days. And yes, I love to be happy and positive and entertain and make people laugh and, typical Leo things. But yeah, some days are really hard, and I'd like to talk about that and work through that as I work on this painting. But let's draw for a little bit, shall we? our sketch is done, and today we will be using the Winston & Newton designer gouache as well as their basic one. I don't know, the red box. I mainly use the designer ones. My boyfriend, my biggest supporter, was the one that bought me these for my birthday, and I really love them. They're very pigmented and really great. A little pricey, but I use the red ones today too, and it's actually pretty decent as well. So, as for materials, I kind of just like to use a towel and a spray bottle because the cup just gets so messy and gross and makes my brushes like weird. I don't know. I just like the spray bottle to activate the paints. Anyways, if you have any questions on mixing paint, I'm probably not the one. You can check out my tutorial on how to use color in your art because the basics of color theory are what I rely on, but I'm just not good with making sure I have enough because I always have too much or too little. I don't know. Anyways, today we are going to be using a purple underpainting. This is a technique I picked up from oil painters and digital painters. It really just unifies the painting, and I decided I want to do purple because obviously my sketch is in orange. Technically, the complementary color of orange is blue, but even though I was feeling blue this week, I didn't feel like this painting should be blue, if that makes sense. I think emotions are very much as Inside Out has laid them out. I think you can definitely have many emotions mixed into memories, and I think for this painting, it's very bittersweet. Um, so I guess I should get into a little bit of my story. I have to say though, I am like so scared to like talk about myself. But I was just talking to my mom, and she was right in saying that I'm entitled to my own story, to my own life experience. And I was born with this gift to create and to work through my feelings through art, through writing, and it's my prerogative. So, the little girl in this picture grew up a little isolated. Now in my current life, I have four sisters, a stepbrother, new families from remarriage, and a bajillion cousins. That really wasn't the case when I was younger. I was the first grandkid and the only child of my parents for the first like 10 years of my life. And I know that so many people make fun of only children, that we're weirdos. And yeah, that's probably true. I think the biggest takeaway from growing up, developing, I guess, as an only child, especially with the situation of just like no other cousins or grandkids, so it's very isolating and you're just around adults a lot. And it did suck, not really having siblings to play with or tussle with like my sisters do with each other now. But, I mean, it wasn't all bad. I had a neighbor that I played with all the time that was my age, and I grew up as an old soul and just was super interested in adult conversation and adult problems, and was always called, wise for my age. And I was pretty well behaved in public. Um, I, like I said, I just loved listening in on conversations. I loved being told that I was mature for my age, that I was an old soul. I wore it like a badge of honor. But I think the older that I got, and I think especially now, the more I realize that that isn't always the best thing. Because of that, because of how well behaved and put together I kind of presented myself as a tiny child, um, it kind of gave the adults in my life the view that I was okay and that I could handle things on my own. And wouldn't you know, that's not true. So yeah, I was a child of divorce, just like many other children in the early 2000s. I know it's not unique, but that was my story. And because I was so put together on the outside, I think that my family thought that I handled it really well. And to be honest, like, I guess on the outside maybe I did, but now, like, I have, like, no memories of things that happened around that time. I was probably about 8 or 9 when my parents divorced, and I have had conversations with other kids of divorce because, like I said, I'm not unique, and I know that. And they remember the talk and how their parents broke it to them. I have no memory of that. I have no memory of things falling apart for my parents at all. It's just all a blur to me. And what I do remember is being told that I was really strong and that I handled it well. And I remember my parents kind of asking me things that I probably shouldn't have had control over, which I won't necessarily get into, but just being asked to make adult decisions or give my opinion on things that I don't think my opinion was needed for because I was a child. And all in all, like, it was really hard. And my parents were married, and my mom was really gracious, and my stepdad were really gracious to make sure that I always felt included and that I never felt isolated. But things were a little different with my dad, and I really struggled with that aspect. And I think also just, my parents remarrying and both having their own families and children of their own, and me being a decade older than my siblings was difficult on its own because I was having a lot of trouble processing. Sorry, I'm not trying to cry. But I was having a lot of trouble processing things, and I just felt like numb. And like I said, I don't have a lot of memories from that time period, and I don't think it was easy for me to process, or I knew even where to start or how to address it. Because there was a lot of drama and there was a lot of trauma, and I think something that I don't see talked a lot about online when people talk about these age gaps or these types of situations is how isolating it is because you're still mourning the loss of your family while also getting used to your new situation, all the changes. I moved schools, I lost a lot of my friends. It was like hard seeing my parents kind of cope with the, the new way of living on their own, and just trying to be strong and show them that I was okay. Even though I wasn't, I think I just have always been very, like I said, emotional and very empathetic, and I wanted everyone else to be okay and just know that I was good so they could take care of themselves. But I think that in turn just really hindered my own growth. I was so worried about my parents, and even though I didn't know the details of everything at the time, I just could sense like how deep and emotional this was, and I wanted them to be okay. So I just presented that I was okay because I was so worried about them. And then I became an older sister, and then I was worrying about my sisters and becoming an older sister and stepping into that and doing good in school and just being the strong person that everybody wanted me to be or everyone told me that I was. And it got really difficult when I was becoming a preteen because obviously you're going through puberty, and when you're 12 or 13, as my sisters now are, I'm remembering how how angry you are and how sad you are just in general. And I think feelings from the past were starting to surface, but I still didn't know how to deal with them. So I would just bottle them up, be strong, but as a teen it's like now you're just moody, so yeah, I just was a moody girl and just unaware of how to deal with things, and it would just come out because I bottled it up. It would just come out at like the worst times, misdirected at the wrong people. And at this time, I was seeing my dad less and less, which was really difficult for me because the little girl in the picture was a daddy's girl. And it started to get worse and worse. And by the time I got to high school, he moved to Texas with his, new wife. And it sucked. And if it wasn't bad before, I was a full on angry teenager who loved to argue with my mom and was starting to just really be resentful of being a big sister and always having to take care of people and not being able to take care of myself, which it's not their fault, not anyone's fault but mine. But again, I was a teenager, I was a kid, I didn't know how to do these things yet. And I just couldn't I couldn't do anything. I didn't know how to do anything but bottle it up. And I think high school was the time where I was like in full-fledged, like super go-getter, ambitious mode, and I wasn't giving myself the time. I also didn't have the resources or the knowledge to deal with this stuff. And it was just AP classes and extracurricular and striving to just get into a good college and do best and make everybody proud. And I did it, and I was so excited to move away from home and to experience something new. But freshman year of college was so difficult for me for a number of reasons. Number one, the first semester just is an intense change, and you're alone so much of the time as you're finding yourself, as you're finding your friends, your community, your network. And that all got cut short for me because COVID happened, and all the friends I was making, all the new experience I was getting was just taken away from me. And I was really forced to sit with myself and think about all of the things that I'd put off for so many years. And it was such an emotionally turbulent time of my life and so isolating and just so hard. And I think it's kind of why a lot of people hate to be alone, because when you're alone, you're forced to think of all the things you don't want to think of. And whereas a lot of people run away from it, I sat with it, I ran towards it. And shortly after, I met the love of my life, and I really just wanted to run away from it because it was so scary, but I didn't. And I told myself that, if I wanted this to work out, I needed to figure some stuff out and I needed to go to therapy. And I think sometimes people will tell you that, oh, I just need to work on myself so we can't be together. And I didn't want to be one of those people. And I think for me, it was like, wow, I love you so much that I need to go to therapy. And I just realized that I was ill equipped to be in a healthy relationship and to lead the life and build the life that I wanted to build. So, yeah, I started going to therapy because I wanted to be a better person for him, but also to just be a better person for myself. It wasn't, oh, well, I want to do it for him. It was for me. 100%. I I wanted to have an intimate relationship. I wanted to like not sabotage things for once in my life. I wanted to be a healthy person. I still want those things and I'm still working towards those things, but I just I needed to start something. I needed to do something for myself. And being as stubborn and strong and resilient as I was very difficult in the beginning. Like I was like, I don't like my therapist, or I don't like where this is going, or I didn't like it. But we stuck with it and we kept digging, and I definitely stopped going a couple times, and I had a few periods where I just wasn't going, but I kept coming back eventually, because it's really hard to kind of look within and realize, like, some of the things that I do aren't great. with big emotions comes big responsibilities, and obviously it's important to validate your own feelings, but it's also important to take responsibility when you're acting out negatively on those emotions. And I definitely was, and I had so many bad habits that I had just learned growing up, or were coping mechanisms that weren't healthy and were kind of harmful to the people in my life and to myself. And it's hard to admit that you're wrong, or to think that, oh, but I'm hurt. So it's like, yeah, you are hurt, but also, like, you could go about things a little bit better, Alyssa. But aside from learning how to cope with my emotions better and to sit with them, and to learn better ways to deal with those tough feelings of anger and sadness, um, I've also learned to grieve what once was. And this picture really encapsulates how lonely I felt throughout the years, and how um, isolating it is to kind of be strong and resilient at such a young age, because you want everyone else to be happy. And I think that's kind of why I added the clown makeup here, because she definitely was a performer, but she also was very lonely, and I wish I could give her a big hug and play with her and listen to all her crazy stories and dreams. And even though I can't go back and change things for her, I just know that I am the person that she would have been proud to become. I think she would think I'm cool or whatever. I think she would look up to me, and I think I would have been a really safe person for her to talk to. And unfortunately, I have read that book. It doesn't start with you. That, you know, our temperament and emotions get passed down. So it's very likely that when I have kids, they will also have big emotions. But even though I can't go back and fix things for her, I know that I'm doing everything that I can for my future children to kind of teach them how to deal with those big things and how to cope in a healthy way. And that in itself, even though it hasn't happened, I think makes me feel good and makes me feel better. And it's okay to grieve the past, and it's okay that things happen the way they are. I definitely used to be a lot angrier at my parents, but I have worked through that. And I think part of growing up is realizing that your parents are flawed and they're human, and you're not always going to understand why things happen, why people do what they do, but you can move forward. And like I said, I think being resilient and pushing forward can be a good thing when you give yourself the space to validate your feelings and sit with through the tough stuff. But yeah, this little girl is always going to be inside of me, and those feelings of abandonment and loneliness might always be there, but that's okay, because I am constantly working on putting energy towards myself and being there for myself, because I haven't always shown up for myself. And yeah, that was really personal. But like I said, I think it's really important to kind of share the sad stuff and share the bad things, because like I said, I present very happy and optimistic, and I am, but that this little girl, like I said, is always going to be there. And sometimes it's going to be a little rainy in my brain, and some days it's going to be really sunny. Some days it's going to be a little cloudy but manageable. And it's okay. Emotions are a roller coaster. And I think if you just let them pass through your body instead of holding them hostage inside your body, uh, things will be okay. And yeah. I like to paint, and I like to go to the gym to work through these things, and that is my story. A little draw my life with me or whatever. Not really, but anyways, just to take the final minutes to kind of really talk about the painting a little bit more. I think composition wise, it's like, ugh, so bland in the background. But that's my house. That's the house I grew up in, and it's also not perfect. I'm not a POV kind of girl. That stuff has always been really hard for me. Like I said, portrait artists of people and pets. Anything outside of that, mind your business. But I drew most of this from memory. I definitely used that picture, like I said, as reference, but everything else was from memory. And I think that's one of the hardest parts. Now we are in a even more digital age, and I think growing up, I don't have that many pictures of my house. I have had to get a lot of pictures off of freaking Google from Redfin, and I think that's difficult in itself. But yeah, this was my house growing up, and I have titled this piece Jester of the Court. However, this court jester is long retired, and anyone who knows me knows that my entertaining days are over. So thank you for watching. Please subscribe, and I will see you next week.